Nonconformity, you brought that up. In the 50s, early 50s, the British Journal of Sociology did an interesting article about the Welsh revival and nonconformity. And it caught my eye because nonconformity sounds very creative. You know, most creatives are not particularly conforming. And
no.
The main point of that article was that the revival of 1904 mostly swept through non-conforming churches.
Yes.
And so my question is, how can the outpouring, the awakening, reach all the stratas of civilization, you know, and not just kind of a single, sometimes, you know, I think the more expert we think on something, the more closed we are to the new. So I think that probably, but do you understand the gist of that question?
Yeah. No, the problem with it is this: the non-conformists of the 1900s and the late 19th century were incredibly conformist. They weren't conform by that time. All right, they were non-conformist. For Wales, you could go into any chapel in Wales, whether it was Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, Calvinistic, Methodist, any of these chapels, and the services would be the same. Everything was incredibly conformist to the Welsh culture that had grown out of non-conformity.
So talk to us about that, because I think that historically is true of everything.
Of course it is.
Yes.
Yes. Non-conformity becomes conformity. Mm-hmm. The lava becomes rock.
Yes.
Okay. That's what happens when it cools down. It becomes rock. And there is need for another explosion to feel the lava. Mm. So by 1900, Wales was definitely a Christian nation, very much so. The culture was infested with Christianity, and I mean infestation in the best sense of that. It's culture, it's poetry, it's singing. If you sang, generally what you sang were Welsh hymns. And this continued right through to the 20th century. I remember not even being a Christian. I was 16 years old in an Eisteddfod, busily getting inebriated with my friends in a pub, and underage at that time, of course, as well. And at the end of the evening, what was everyone singing? All the Welsh hymns. Mm. They were singing Welsh hymns. What do they sing? In the rugby matches, international, they sing the hymns. Mm. William's Pantacalion, by the way. Guide me, O thou great Jehovah, feed me till I want no more. So the whole of society at that time was much more. Everybody knew the hymns. A lot of people went to chapel. Not everybody went, but a good amount of people went to chapel. The cultural events were around the chapel. Children went to what was called Band of Hope, Sunday school. Band of Hope. The Band of Hope was something coming out of the. I'm trying to think the word now. When you don't drink alcohol, what's that? People not drinking alcohol.
Oh, prohibition.
Yeah, but not prohibition. Oh, no. People deciding not to.
Absolutely.
Teetotal. The teetotal movement, which began in America round about the 1830s, but came over to Wales very early. By the 1840s, nearly every Welsh minister was a teetotaler. Mm. Nearly every Welsh minister. Just a few not, and maybe one or two didn't say, but the whole of Wales had this whole groups of people who would get together, not in the pub. They wanted somewhere different to be together. So for the children, it was the Band of Hope, and there were all sorts of things going on there. And then for grown-ups, you had all the choirs and things, and that grew, of course, at the latter part of the 19th century. So if you went into Wales on Sunday, everyone went to chapel. The minister was the cool dude. The minister was the guy who was the big verse. I often speak about how to understand how Christianity had really gone everywhere in Wales. I have just behind me a 13-volume sort of Encyclopedia Britannica written in Welsh. It wasn't the Encyclopedia Britannica. It's called the Gwyddion, which was a Welsh Encyclopedia Britannica, and covers everything, written around about the 1860s, and I think I've got the 1870 version if I remember correctly. But anyway, what I want to say is this. In this, you'd have articles on all sorts of things. So you would have an article maybe on the Crimean War, okay? You'd have an article on the French Revolution. You'd have an article on Socrates or other famous people, Alexander the Great, and you'd have all these articles, Napoleon. But right next to these articles, there would be biographies of hardly unknown Welsh preachers who were regarded by the nation as important as all these personages. So in Wales, the key people in Wales were the non-conformist ministers, not the politicians. It was a history of 19th century Wales is a history of these powerful men, many of them politically minded as well, okay, but who preached the gospel, and people would come from all over. These were the heroes, the rock stars of the 19th century in Wales were the preachers. These were they were the rock stars, not the politicians, not your entertainers. It was not your rich people, not your Anglican, not even your Anglican priest or curate or whatever. It was the non-conformist preacher. If you'd made it there, you were on the top rung of Welsh culture.
Wow, fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
But that doesn't mean that all of those were alive spiritually at the time. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that it's a Christian culture, but that culture often needed to be revived. And the history of Christianity in Wales in the 19th century is a history of that evangelical culture, Bible-believing culture, constantly being revived throughout the century, sometimes led by key preachers who were already famous for revival. Christmas Evans. Have you heard of Christmas Evans? Yes. Christmas Evans, a one-eyed preacher.
Yes.
Fascinating character. He writes, and I was thinking of recommending, if you haven't read this, he writes a defense of Welsh jumping. Have you heard about that?
No, I heard that it was prominent in the Sea of Glass, that there was jumping and prostitution.
Jumping. That's when it first happened.
Yes.
So he is writing, Christmas Evans has already been involved in revival, the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 20th. Incredibly brilliant preacher. His metaphors are unbelievable. They're just marvelous. And so, of course, the Baptist is a Baptist. They were being criticized by the English Baptists for all their emotionalism because they got so excited. And some people would jump. They would jump. And the guy is neidio. They would jump and they would and Gorfoleddi means they would praise, they would bubble with praise. And of course,
the love.
The love of Christ. So what's happening is so he actually meets some of the Baptists in England and gives an apology to them. Apology being a positive, not saying sorry for them, apologia pro sua sort of apology. And it's marvelous. It's marvelous. I would and lots of his, and I'm saying that because lots of Evans' stuff is translated into English. You can get books on Evans in English. So if you look that up, Christmas Evans, his apology for Welsh jumping, I'm sure that's online as well. It's a great read. It's a great read, and that gives you insight into the difference between religiosity and the need of revival. And he argues for it, and he does it so well. You know he's a preacher. And, oh, it's just magnificent.
Beautiful.